Welcome to the last session ever of personal choice and global transformation, and we have quite a special day today. Let me start by mentioning a symposium, the PCGT Symposium, organized by students in the class that will take place on May 10th and May 13th. And you should have received a description of this coming in. The events include discussion of the shelter of one another, what next for community and solidarity that I'll be doing, the arts in action, creative protest from destructive times, made by kids, abominable companies, persuasive technologies, unselfing, meaningful work as a remedy for despair, resisting PowerPoints, siren call, back to basics, how to get your op-ed published, and the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And all of this will be May 10th and 13th. If you would like to attend this symposium, space is limited, and you should sign up on a sign-up sheet after class, or email the teaching fellow who has spearheaded the effort to organize this, Emma Samuelson-Jones, and her email is esjones@tbrc.mgh, that's Mass General Hospital, .harvard.edu. At this point, I'd like to ask all of the teaching fellows to join me up front. Teachers of personal choice. Teachers of personal choice and global transformation, for your dedicated labor in a demanding course, we thank you. Brian, I want to include an extra word of thanks to head teaching fellow Kate Holbrook. Kate and I first dreamt up the initial plans for this course in the spring of 2001 in the Leverett House Dining Hall, and we've been collaborating ever since on courses of large scale and controversy. And her wisdom and her hard work have made this course the unusual and sometimes powerful course that it is. And it is a cruelty of academic hierarchies that I have received most of the credit for her work. Thank you, Kate Holbrook.
Brian, we know that the thanks of your students mean more to you than any present we could get you, so your students have gotten together and written letters, and they will continue coming just to thank you for the service and dedication that you've put into this class. So for that, we thank you.
Thank you. Wow, just what I wanted. The teaching team has bought me a sport utility vehicle, a GM Avalanche. Thank you. And I'll give the microphone to Ann Kim for something that I haven't seen and I'm a little nervous about.
You shouldn't be nervous, that's okay. This is just a quick thank you from everybody in the class. So I don't know if anybody can dim the lights back there. Can we do it in the front?
As Bernie posts, bullies like Bush are inducting Roy writes, I quote, "Remember this, we be many and they be few. They need us more than we need them. Together with our friends around the world, we who are here today are the founding sisters and brothers of a global community."
Howard Zinn for being a model of courage, clarity, and joy of life. We thank you.
To Lady Scary for showing us how to engage in the difficult intellectual labor of citizenship. We thank you.
Bob Bright.
For this burst of insight and hope,
And in anticipation that we will succeed in drafting you to run for president,
we thank you.
Thank you, Ann Kim, and also Anna Portnoy for splendid video work. I will be sending copies of this out all around the world to various institutions during my years of unemployment. It's a great pleasure to introduce someone who's been one of my true teachers. And persons introducing Jonathan Kozol often speak of his many accomplishments, of best-selling books, of the Rhodes Scholarship, of the National Book Award. Let me instead concentrate on something more significant. As undergraduates, my sister and I went to interview and then work for Ralph Nader. And that summer, when we arrived at his office, he handed us both copies of The Night is Dark and I Am Far From Home. He had bought several hundred copies that he had in boxes because he felt the book was so important. He wanted to give it to everyone. And he pointed us to a certain paragraph in the book about engagement and the possibilities for making change. And he asked us to read it on the spot in our first minutes of working for him that summer. And then he said, isn't this extraordinary? This guy really says exactly what needs to be said. So our first assignment on the job was to finish reading Jonathan Kozol's book. And I became very curious about who had written these powerful words, and later had the chance to meet Jonathan. There's a piece at the end of the book that describes my own feelings about him. He writes, "I do not feel awkward, though I did for years, to speak of my affection for some of those older people whom I trust and love. I think the reverence that we feel for men and women who have been our true teachers, and the way that love can change our lives, our vision, our perception of all things we know, and open up new areas of freedom and imagination we have never felt, after certain periods of loneliness that we have never undergone, that this is, in the long run, what education is, and nothing else but this. So with my awkwardly expressed affection, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Kozol." Sure, yeah.
Well, just so you'll know whose awful handwriting that is, that's mine. And I put that up there because this is such a wonderful, wonderful group of people have always been attracted to this class. I often want to keep in touch with a lot of you afterwards. And this information is up there for two reasons. One is the following. During the summer ahead, for those of you who might be around in Cambridge, and probably stretching into the fall, I'm going to have a series of kind of informal sessions, symposiums, just hanging out and talking about issues of social change and education and race and social justice. Haven't yet figured out where we're going to do this, but if any of you are going to be around and would like to be invited, call me or fax me or write me. And yes, I have to admit I don't do email. Not yet. Maybe one of you teach me this summer. And the other reason that's up there is because I'm going to be looking for a couple of part-time helpers, research assistants, starting in the fall, and sort of thing that people can do while they're in graduate school or hanging out in Harvard Square, or whatever you do after you graduate. And if you're interested in that, there's a bunch of paper over here on the end of this table. If you'd like to put your name there and an address and phone number, we'll follow up with you. Or you can just call my cell phone, if you like. When I look for people to help me with my work, I know there are wonderful undergraduates here. I don't want to, where's Kate? Oh, there you are. I don't want to insult you, but she's an undergraduate. But it usually works best when it's somebody who's a graduating senior or a grad student, so they have a little more time. And sometimes they have a car, and that helps too. So that's all I wanted to say, because I know some of you will have to leave before we're done. So if you're interested and you're not bashful, just slip down here, leave the information. If you want to talk seriously, stay till the end, because I'll hang out a little bit after we're done today. Thank you. That's all the business for today.
And at 4 o'clock, we'll continue the discussion for those who wish for another hour. We'll need to do that next door in Hall C, because there's another event that's coming in here. If I could take the privilege of asking the first question, Jonathan, I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about your own time at Harvard. How did Harvard shape you? And also, was there anything that you felt you had to relearn or unlearn afterwards?
The first thing I had to unlearn was this awful British accent that I developed while I was living in Eliot House. I loved my time at Harvard. It was a feast for me. I just loved English literature, and that's basically all I did while I was here. I'm amazed I graduated because of, all the distribution requirements, and I really came out of Harvard a thoroughly unbalanced person, because I didn't know anything about science or math. I just avoided all those courses because I liked poetry. The one big change for me after I left Harvard was discovering a multicultural world, and more to the point, discovering a world in which people suffered acutely, and not simply suffered in the way that all of us do, with our own hang-ups and neuroses and personal worries, but suffered in grave ways, extreme poverty and severe illness and homelessness and all the forms of deep oppression that existed in our nation. And it's odd that I didn't notice this while I was at Harvard, but it really wasn't till later that I discovered that there was a section of Boston that white people didn't go to. It was Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. When after going to Oxford, which I didn't like at all, I say I had a Rhodes Scholarship. I don't know how I got it, because I didn't qualify. You're supposed to be an athlete, and I didn't even pass the swimming test here at Harvard. Do they still have that? No. And I really hated Oxford because everybody sounded British, and I also found it immature, actually, the undergraduate life at Oxford. So I skipped out, went to Paris, and spent 3 years there. And when I returned to the United States, I was probably going to come back here and go to graduate school in literature, which I think my folks would have liked, because they were getting worried about me by that age. I was pretty much on the verge of it when the civil rights movement swept the South, and in the early summer of 1964, 3 young people who had gone down to Mississippi to lead the first phase of what came to be known as Freedom Summer, an effort to break the back of apartheid in the South. These 3 young people disappeared. 2 of them were white, 1 was black, and of course, black people had always been disappeared and lynched in the South, and nobody ever paid attention, but this time it was black and white kids together, and their bodies were later found buried under a dam in the town of Philadelphia, Mississippi, murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. And that event, along with the rising tide of political ferment in the country, just changed my life forever. And one day, instead of coming to University Hall to apply for graduate school, I got on the train, on the T, and went to Roxbury and walked into a black church and just said, can I be of any use? And the minister actually surprised me. He said, yes, you can, young man. In fact, I'm glad you came here rather than going south, because all the racism in America is not in Mississippi. We've got plenty right here in Boston, and we're starting a summer freedom school for our children. Could you teach reading? Do you know how to teach reading? And I said, no, I went to Harvard. And I didn't know anything useful, but he said, we'll teach you to teach reading. And they did, and I got to like the kids so much that in the fall, I signed up as a teacher in the Boston Public Schools, and in one way or another, these events transformed my life. So I'm still glad that I came to Harvard and learned all that wonderful poetry. But it was a protected time in my life, and it took some nerve to go out and not just discover the real world of grief and pain beyond Harvard Yard, but also to try to do something about it.
Alejandra Guzman.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. You criticize teachers and doctors that work in the ghetto, then leave to their suburban homes because it makes the confrontation between the two worlds feel less believable. However, Reverend Debbie Little, a previous speaker and an avid helper of the poor, says that the distance is necessary for her survival and to prevent her from burning out.
Could you say that last part slowly, because I just couldn't get the words.
Okay, sorry.
However,
Reverend Debbie Little, a previous speaker and an avid helper of the poor, says that the distance is necessary for her survival and to prevent her from burning out. So my question to you is this. Do you believe that it is worth sacrificing the lives and well-being of the helpers in order to make the confrontation feel more believable? Also, what do you do to find this tangible confrontation and still have the strength and perseverance to stand here today?
What do I do to find this tangible?
To find the confrontation between the two worlds. And
confrontation. Okay, good. Now I understand what you're saying. Well, first of all, I try not to encourage confrontation, but as much as possible, solidarity between the two worlds. And it is it is a personal struggle sometimes to navigate between these two worlds, the world of privilege. You spoke of the suburbs, but I'll just say the world of privilege and the world of poverty and often powerlessness. It's very difficult to navigate it sometimes because the two worlds are so far apart in this nation, and especially in New York City, where my last two books have taken place, where I've spent a great deal of the past decade. I have privileged friends who live in Manhattan, who might be my Harvard classmates, or might be your parents, or in many cases, and people in the publishing world and so forth. And then the other half of my life, and really more than half, is in the South Bronx, where I've grown deeply involved with not just with kids in general, but with a lot of specific children. Some of you who've read my books, Amazing Grace, Ordinary Resurrections, have gotten to know these kids and have come to love them. Kids like Pineapple, this delightful little girl in the South Bronx who kind of dominated my life for several years. One of these bossy little 8-year-olds who is very good at pushing grown-ups around, and it's like she just has the best manipulative skills, but she does it so well that you don't object because it's so charming. And Hillary Clinton came up with me once to visit the neighborhood, and Pineapple bossed her around. And I see these kids and their parents and grandparents living in a world that's unimaginable to my friends who live just a few subway stops away. It's only 6 stops on the number 6 line, the Lexington Avenue line, between the poorest congressional district in America and the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is one of the wealthiest demographic areas in the world. The families that I know there, as of 2 years ago, earned an average, whole family lived typically on about $12,000 a year. I knew one woman who had a real job at Toys R Us, for which she was paid about $16,000 a year, and she was viewed as middle class in the community. HIV infection was very common in this neighborhood. It was one of the most concentrated areas of HIV infection in the developed world. Asthma, pediatric asthma, was higher in this neighborhood than almost anywhere in the United States or Europe. I think it was the highest rate of pediatric asthma in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in North America. And enormous hunger, especially at the ends of the months, when what minimal welfare benefits still exist tend to run out. You see people lined up at soup kitchens and food pantries, and more people but less food to give away. And so the thing is, when I feel more at home in that community than I do in Manhattan or Cambridge. And yet I have to live in both communities. And sometimes it's very hard to make the transition. I know this is veering off from your question a little bit, but you just have to put up with me. I don't have a very linear imagination. And I sort of learned this from children. They never really answer exactly the question that you ask. They usually give you a more interesting answer, though, I think. I've learned not to insist that. I think one of the worst things that's happening in inner city schools now is this insistence that every that every lesson has to have a specific outcome, which you write up on the board in advance, because the outcomes that matter most are always the ones you wouldn't have thought of writing on the blackboard. But for a lot of reasons, I find it very hard to return from the Bronx and behave with appropriate civility in places of privilege. I always return with an uncomfortable sense of irony about things, and I get uncomfortable easily in a dinner party setting, for example, when people attempt to be sympathetic but seem so detached that it would almost be better if they were antagonistic, and then I could argue with them openly. Do you know what I mean by that? If they were really hostile to the sort of work I do, we could have a good, a good tough debate. But most of my friends are very civilized, so they sort of agree with me on everything until it comes to something like paying higher taxes for better schools for the kids I write about. And then suddenly a wall goes up and this real toughness comes into play. And typically they'll say to me, well, I agree that it's terribly unfair that the kids you know have to undergo so much suffering and have to go to such awful schools with poorly paid teachers and substitute teachers and in squalid buildings that are overcrowded with medieval-looking stairways and corridors. And I agree that all that's unfair, they'll say. But then they'll look at me and say, is money really the answer? And it's a typical question rich people ask is, can you really buy your way to better education for poor people? And many of my friends send they don't simply send their kids to spectacular suburban schools. They typically, when their kids are teenagers, they send them to schools like Exeter or Groton or Andover, which now cost about $40,000 a year. So they may have two kids at Exeter spending $80,000 a year to guarantee their children a royal road into the Ivy League. And they have the nerve to look at me and say, can you really buy your way to better education? And I really am a nice person. I mean, I don't like to be mean or rude. But sometimes when they say that to me, if I have a few glasses of wine, I'm tempted to look right at them and say, I don't know, it seems to do the trick for your kids, doesn't it? Now, that's the dilemma here. It's sort of the dilemma of nice people who would be glad to mentor a child in the Bronx, because that's a sweet thing to do. Would be glad to go up and tutor a child in the Bronx. Would be glad to go up and help out at a homeless shelter 3 times a year, or bring food at Thanksgiving to a food pantry, a sort of a seasonal ritual in the United States. But ultimately don't want to contemplate the deep structural changes it would take to bring real justice, genuine justice and equality to our society. And by resisting justice, as a matter of fact, they create the continuing preconditions for charity. It gives a lot of them something interesting to do in life. Hold charity luncheons and benefits for the poor. And the thing is, I don't mean to be, I'm sounding bitter, aren't I? Oh, I hate it when I sound like that, but I'll try to be nice, but try to be more gentle. But the thing that's very upsetting is they're all in favor of service programs. And many build an entire social life out of service programs. I cannot tell you how many luncheons there are in New York at very elegant hotels in order to raise money to do something nice for the poor. But in a truly just society, their charity wouldn't be needed, or not on this scale. I'm all in favor of charity and service, but charity is not a substitute for justice. That's my own feeling, and I worry about that.
Savi Sepa.
Thank you for coming,
Hi.
Mr. Kozol. In one of your books, you praise students who turn down attending Harvard and Yale, and write that a Harvard student builds his life and career upon the ruined hopes and broken dreams of other people every bit his human equal. However, as a Harvard alumni and Rhodes Scholar, you have taken part in these very same elite
That's right.
institutions. So first, how do you justify your own taking advantage of privilege? And second, what advice do you give us in terms of finding a balance between doing well and doing good in the world?
Boy, these are wonderful questions. They're tough questions. Well, first of all, I've never resolved that paradox. I sometimes think if I write an autobiography someday, I'll call it Living with Contradictions, because there's no real way to escape them. You can spend an extended period of your time, as I did, living amongst poor people. I lived for nearly 18 years in the black community of Boston. You can forego nice clothes and expensive cars and holidays and all that stuff. You can do all that, and you can join in deepest solidarity with poor people, and yet you always know that you have that little magic key to privilege, which is your Harvard degree, which is sort of like the ultimate American Express card. And then when you're ready to pull it out of your wallet, you can shift gears, and they will accept you back into the world of privilege. So there's no real way of escaping this duality. And the only thing I've tried to do, imperfect to be sure, is to try to use the benefits of privilege in order to lessen the extremes of privilege in the future, by try to use every single bit of skill or competence I might have gained here at this university or in this general milieu where I have so many close attachments and friends, to use every contact, every friend and ally that I've made within the world of privilege to try to level the gates, to try to level the field and lower the gates. I guess you can't really level the gates. Lower the gates and level the playing field in any way I can. And that's why I do end up at these formal dinner parties on the Upper East Side of Manhattan now and then in order to try to convince somebody who does have some power to do something that could seriously make a difference. And some do. But you can't ever really escape that contradiction. So I say use it. Use it. Even use every aspect of privilege you have to try to empower the poor and challenge the rich in any way that's possible. I'm going to try to give shorter answers. I hope that won't shock you, Brian, but it's not my custom. This is the affliction of somebody who has my affliction, somebody who's had to be on television debates too often, and if you ever end up, as I've had to do many times, appearing on a program like Nightline, or still worse, a truly combative program like Crossfire on CNN, and you're sitting opposite some charming person like Robert Novak, or Pat Buchanan, who used to be the host there, you find that as soon as you have a moment to talk, you just keep on talking. You don't stop if you can avoid it. Sorry about that.
Aidan Madigan Curtis.
One of the major themes of your work is to expose that in our lives we have no connections.
Everybody here talks fast.
Sorry.
Nice and slow. It's
No
echoey down here.
connections. So you talk about us having no connections. You express opportunity in life as a zero-sum game. For some to prosper, others must suffer. As Harvard students, we are evidently here at the significant expense of others. What should we do about this? Even if some of us who are most affected by your work were to form a movement and quit college in the name of those who suffer, it is not certain that everyone would agree with the movement and just quit as well. In that case, we would have just walked out for the sake of a failed movement on an opportunity to use our Harvard education to advocate for the people who were deprived so that we could be privileged. Can we help to effectively change the system using our Harvard advantage?
Can we do what?
Can we attempt to change the system using our Harvard advantage? If so, how? If not, then what should we do to assure ourselves that we'll not be simply replaced by other students trained to jump through hoops of social convention? How can we build connections?
Very good questions. Well,
Sorry, it's really long.
first of all, don't quit college, please. Don't quit. I don't want all your parents angry at me. I already make enough enemies. No, finish college, please. And I don't see it as entirely a zero-sum game, but we'll bypass that for the moment. I think the main, look, first of all, if Harvard students are going to go on, I mean, if some people in America are going to hold the reins of power in the United States and are going to run large foundations and corporations and have a powerful role in political circles, I would rather it be you than the folks who have never thought about these issues. So to those of you who aspire to that type of sort of traditional Harvard success, I would say all power to you. Just don't allow yourself to surgically remove the lessons that you've learned in this class or the lessons of your heart that impelled you even to take this kind of course. Just try to be faithful to the best, most passionate, most impatient ethical instincts of your youth, and never let society convince you that to be truly mature, you have to moderate everything good that you believe. There's a terrible cultural myth in our society that I still imposed on me, even at my age, that I will prove that I'm truly grown up when I stop ruining dinner parties. You know, I'll show that I'm a true product of high civilization when I stop getting edgy, or when I state my political objections in such clever and amusing and ironic ways that they can't intimidate anyone. Do you know what I mean by that? That's the ultimate trick that you'll see in highly civilized settings where people will lodge their social criticisms in such amusing upper-class ways that it doesn't create any sense of passionate confrontation at all. And for the rest of you who do choose to devote your life to social change, I would simply beg you to be very careful about letting yourself fall into what I would call the detached world of public policy on behalf of the poor, as opposed to gravitating to work in which you actually are involved, engaged, intimately engaged among the poor. I think there's no political training, there's no soul-transforming, transcendent, beautiful experience as valuable as actually organizing among homeless people to fight the government, which is cutting back housing subsidies, and do that with them in their neighborhoods, in the streets, where they are, where they live. I don't think there's anything you can ever learn in a doctoral program in education that will have 1/10 the emotional impact and political upheaval in your soul as going in and actually teaching kids in a real inner city school, real lessons, the real odds they face every day. I say this because an awful lot of wonderful young people I know who share most of my values will do something like that maybe for a year or two, like Teach for America. And then 3 years later I say, where is he or she now? What are they doing now? And I find that, and someone will say, oh, she's at the JFK School of Public Policy. She's getting a degree in, I don't know, how to change urban education. And my heart always